Well, let's see if I can get a few of the basic physics down, how wheels work. So let's start out. Let's say you want to move something. You know, in the old days they used to have this thing where you would have a series of poles, and you'd have horses walking around in a circle, and that would drive a pump, a mill, something like that. Well, a wheel works much the same way. The only thing is, this is a hub. Okay, and you've got a wheel out here somewhere, and what connects these two, of course, is the spoke. Now, I think it's pretty obvious just from life experience that the optimal way to connect these would be to go at this angle, where this is a 90-degree angle. Because if you go, let's say, at this angle, it's going to be a lot harder to pull this in this direction. You'd have to use a lot more force if you use this angle as opposed to this angle. So we already have the first reason for that we want to have this spoke come in at pretty much a 90-degree angle, and that's just because it applies optimal force. If we have a radially spoked wheel, we're actually not going to be pulling from here. We're going to be pulling from the center of the axle. It's going to be coming straight out here. Okay? Now, this, depending on the size of your hub flange, this arm is going to be longer or shorter. And imagine this were a piece of rope and you're trying to move this. The longer this lever arm is, the easier it is to move this. So what we'd really like, if we're going to oppose torque, is we would like this lever arm to be as long as possible. So this is what 3 cross I think this would be more like 4 cross lacing would look like. Radial, on the other hand, you have absolutely no arm, and radial lacing will not bear torque. The only way that you can keep this from spinning with radial lacing is to add tension on the spoke, which adds a lot of extra stress on the rim. This is why you absolutely do not want radial lacing on the drive side of a wheel. So Mavic, you're idiots. Isopulse is moronic. Deal with it. And I noticed they've been getting away from it. This is, as you'll see in the pictures, what 2x lacing looks like. This angle is not really optimal. It's better than radial, but it's not really optimal. 4x lacing is actually normally looks a little like this. And when you look at the adjacent hole, which I've taken a lot of pictures to try to make this really clear, as opposed to 3x lacing, which tends to go right across so that this is a straight line from one end of the wheel to the other. What 4x does generally is it actually wraps around the flange a little bit. So it will tend to head off in this direction. So it'll come up here, and then it'll come down here. Now why would we want that? Well, if you look at a hub body, I'll just draw a little cross section here, and you look at the flange, there's a certain amount of material here, almost always aluminum. So if you have a spoke hole drilled in it, and you have radial lacing, the spoke is going straight out. Okay, so all of the spoke force is trying to is in this direction. The force vector is in this direction. So it's trying to tear this out because everything is pulling. It's trying to rip this aluminum out. Now when you look at 4-cross or 3-cross, you don't have that. What you typically have is you'll have these two adjacent holes. One spoke will come in this way, and the other spoke will come in, that's adjacent to it, will come in like this, or it may be more like they come in like this and like this. This would probably be 3x spoking, and this would be 4x spoking. Okay, where are the force vectors? Well, the force vector is a little tiny one going this way on the 3x because you know, it's not quite straight across, although if you look at a lot of mountain bike wheels, it is straight across. We'll get to that later. It's a little bit like this. So there's a little teeny tiny force vector going that way, but for the most part the force vector is going this way, and on this spoke it's going this way. Guess what? They're offsetting, and look how much material we have here. This is typically like 3 to 4 times the material that you have between here and here. So look at all of this material it would have to tear out. And that's just the tension load. It's also compressing over here. So it would have to not only tear this out, but crush all of this on both sides. That's just not going to happen. Now you can see with 4x, which actually with 36 spoking you kind of need 4x to go straight across. With 32 spokes, you're going to get a bend down like this. Now I have a picture that illustrates this on a real world production wheel. But here you're actually wrapping the spoke kind of around the flange. So you have no vector going this way. In fact, you have a teeny tiny vector going this way, which is great because you've got all kinds of material down here, because this is all flange. This is all, it's either solid or it might have some holes in it, aluminum. No way that's gonna fail. The bottom line is it's virtually impossible to tear out a spoke on the flange using 3x or 4x spoking. So flange strength. The third reason is length. It's because you're going off to the side, it's actually further. You have to use longer spokes, up to about 5%, in 3 and 4x lacing than you do in radial lacing. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility. The other thing that happens is the spokes overlap like this, and so they bend around each other. So when a spoke compresses, what it does, or if it relaxes, the opposing spoke will tend to absorb some of that flex because they're pushing against each other. So when one relaxes, the other one tends to take up some of that slack, and when it compresses, because it's not straight, it's bent around. The two spokes are bent around each other. They offset each other, so it provides a more robust tension. Now, the reason that spoking is going to be impacted by disc brakes is because disc brakes don't stop the wheel. Disc brakes stop the hub. And the way that that torque gets out to the wheel is through spoking. It's the exact opposite of the torque that you have on the drive side on the rear wheel, and it would radically alter the way front wheels are laced, because you can't use radial lacing. Back to this example, radial lacing can't bear torque. The other thing I like to say about isopulse, which is just breaking every known rule of how to spoke a wheel, is when you have radial lacing on the drive side, got your cassette out here, splines. When you have it on the radial lacing on the drive side, it can't bear torque, so the torque has to go across the hub body to the non-drive side, and this is what isopulse does. Now, the reason isopulse does this is because they're using aluminum spokes. Aluminum spokes can't bend around each other, so they have to be offset. So you have a spoke here and you have a spoke here, and they have these giant spoke anchors. So you need a lot more material. But the real problem is, it turns out hub bodies are very weak. Jobst Brandt calculated that only about 8% of the torque that is applied here actually goes across the hub body to the non-drive side if you have 3-cross spoking over here on the drive side. And the reason is because the spokes don't stretch very much. They stretch so little that the wind-up that gets transferred across the hub is only 8%. Well, on isopulse, it's 100%. Not only that, but they're aluminum spokes, so it's going to try to add more tension on the spoke over here to try to give some ability. What's really happening